We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm your host Newsome, and after the fight night last Saturday that delivered fireworks, we're now looking at another fight night which on paper looks to be extremely exciting. This small cage is continuing to deliver a high amount of finishers with some very quick fights too, so I'm looking forward to seeing the action again this weekend. As for MMA Play 365, we're coming off our third win in a row after another clean sweep last weekend. We cashed just over 3 units on the night with Jordan Espinoza and Cynthia Calvillo putting on absolute clinics to give us that clean sweep. The dog of the week was also Calvillo, so that cashed too, and our fun gamblers were once again having fun. This is a new week though, so we look to carry that momentum into Saturday night. Let's break down some fights. And in the main event of the evening, we've got Curtis Blaydes versus Alexander Volkov, a big fight at heavyweight. Curtis Blaydes currently the minus 400 favourite. The comeback on Alexander Volkov at plus 325. In regards to where the value is for this fight, I don't think there's any value playing Curtis Blaydes straight. And right now, I think there's minimal value playing him in a parlay as well. The line has just got a little bit too far. I think Curtis Blaydes was playable in a parlay up to maybe minus 350, but at minus 400 it is stretching a little bit too far. As for where the line goes, I actually think it comes down a little bit. Like I say, I think minus 400 for a heavyweight fight. I think people will jump on the other side naturally at plus 325 for Alexander Volkov. Volkov's not a bad fighter. He's a good fighter at heavyweight. He's beaten some good fighters as well. So I think at that line, we might see some money coming back on him. But onto the fight and how it plays out. As you can probably already tell, I am picking Curtis Blaydes to win the fight. I'm a huge fan of Curtis Blaydes, and anybody, again, that's known me for a while and spoken to me knows that I think Blaydes is going to be the future heavyweight champion. At some point, he will touch gold in the UFC. The guy's just an absolute stud. I don't think he's a finished product. I think he's still developing. He's a young fighter for a heavyweight. And honestly, I think he's a nightmare matchup for every single fighter in the heavyweight division besides maybe Daniel Cormier and Francis Ngannou. I'm telling you what though, give me good plus money against Daniel Cormier and I'd probably bet Curtis Blaydes there. Ngannou, a little bit of a different scenario. Obviously they fought twice already. But again, Ngannou didn't dead Curtis Blaydes, which he does to pretty much every single fighter he fights. You know, Curtis Blaydes is a good fighter, strong wrestling background, relentless wrestling inside the cage, good chain wrestling, heavy on top, ground and pound, and his striking's improving. You know, that's getting better. We saw him against Junior Dos Santos in his last fight. He struggled to take him down, kept it on the feet after he realised the takedowns weren't going to be as easy as he thought, and he ended up finishing JDS on the feet. So a fighter that is just getting so much better. Although I like Volkov, and in any other fight, especially if he's fighting a striker, you know, the likelihood of me backing Volkov in that fight is extremely high. I think he's a talented striker. It's just in this scenario, I don't see him being able to prevent the takedowns coming from Blaydes, stop that pressure. I don't see him being able to stick on the outside. Remember, this is a smaller cage as well, and these two guys are behemoths in there. Absolutely huge, both guys. So the likelihood of Volkov being able to keep this fight at range, stick on the outside and hit Blaydes as he's coming in and move and exit and angle and again just maintain that space, that range, that distance, I just don't think it's going to be possible, especially for 5 rounds. You know, Curtis Blaydes is going to close that distance. The cage is so much smaller. It might be a couple of minutes. It might even be round 1 that Blaydes just stays on the feet and gets his reads in, gets his time in, starts looking for those opportunities, those openings to enter for a takedown. But eventually, unless Volkov can knock him out before that first takedown comes, I think it's going to be all Curtis Blaydes. And I'm not even sure if Blaydes gets Volkov down on the first attempt. You know, Volkov might spring back up. He's a long, tall fighter, and at 6'7", you know, they're not always the easiest guys to take down. They can post up on their arms, try and remain balanced on the feet, try and spread the base. But that's the other thing in regards to size. Normally fighters that are really tall can be really difficult to take down at times. But people forget Curtis Blaydes is 6'4". Curtis Blaydes has got an 80-inch reach. So he's actually only at a 1-inch reach disadvantage in this fight, which, again, most people that fight Volkov, that difference is normally much greater. But at 6'4" to 6'7", Blaydes isn't too short to have problems taking Volkov down. I think he's at the perfect height. He's going to be in on the hips quite easily. And because he's not very small, like 6 foot, 6'1", he's got that height, extra height to help him lift Volkov and put him on his back. So I think the takedowns are going to be there. Maybe not straight away for Blaydes, but eventually in the fight, Blaydes is going to start taking Volkov down at will. Volkov's got to have a good game plan here. He's got to be throwing knees in. He's got to be throwing uppercuts in just as Blaydes is shooting his takedowns. He's got to get those timings right. And even for Volkov, maybe feinting at the start, feinting the knees, feinting the uppercuts, just showing him those weapons to make Blaydes hesitate. But ultimately, like I say, I think Blaydes can eat a shot for sure. So if Volkov does catch him with something big in the initial openings, in the initial takedown attempts, I don't think it's going to be enough to knock Blaydes out. I mean, at the end of the day, they are heavyweights, so if a knockout was to happen on either side, you can't be surprised. But Blaydes has shown he's got a tough chin. He didn't go unconscious when Ngannou hit him. He didn't go unconscious when Mark Hunt hit him. He didn't go unconscious when Overeem kneed him clean in the face. He's durable, and I think that's going to help. I think Blaydes is going to be able to get the takedowns, and I think at some point along the way he's going to finish Volkov on the mat. So I'm picking Curtis Blaydes to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is a fight I'm really looking forward to as well. We've got Josh Emmett versus Shane Burgos. Shane Burgos currently the -135 favourite. The comeback on Josh Emmett at +115 as the underdog. And talking to the underdog, I actually think the value is on the underdog in this fight as well. I really like both of these fighters. They're both fun, they're both entertaining, but I just think stylistically, which I'll talk about very shortly, it just favours Josh Emmett a little bit more. So I do think that creates the value on the underdog. I think as where the line goes, it's going to fluctuate a little bit. I think we are going to see Emmett coming down to maybe +100. Then I can see money coming back in on Shane Burgos, because a lot of people do like Shane Burgos, and rightly so. At that point, when the money does come back in on Shane Burgos, obviously we'll see Emmett maybe go to +105, +110, +115, maybe back up to +120, which is roughly where the line opened. So I do see some fluctuation here. But over into the fight and how it plays out, like I say, I really like both guys. Both guys are predominantly strikers. Obviously, Emmett has that wrestling background that he never really uses, but we know it's there because he has used it previously in the UFC. It was more so when he was a lightweight, though, before dropping down to featherweight. Maybe it is a tough cut for him, and he does try and keep some of that gas in the tank and doesn't want to expend energy by using his wrestling. Obviously, wrestling does require quite a lot of energy for it to be effective. But yeah, both guys predominantly strikers, but they're very different strikers. So Burgos doesn't load up on his punches. He is more of an accumulation of volume type of striker. Will try and hurt his opponent by hitting him 100 times opposed to trying to knock him out in one big shot. And Burgos is a very calm and relaxed fighter. You can see that on his face when he fights. I've always said this about Burgos. When you look at his face as he's fighting, you can just see that there's nothing really troubling him there. He's focused, he's sharp, and like I say, just ultimately comfortable and relaxed. However, I do think that there is moments in his fights where he's maybe too relaxed, he's too calm, because he fights with his hands down. He comes forward, he'll sit in boxing range, again, hands down. He doesn't have too much movement. He does rely on his head movement to try and evade strikes. And he's been able to get away with it in his fights. You know, he's got a good chin on him. He did get put down by Holloway. He did get knocked out by Keita. He has been hurt in other fights as well. But I think in this fight, he's not going to get away with being that relaxed with his striking defense. He's got to get his hands up to his chin because, in my opinion, Emmett hits harder than any man in that featherweight division. We're talking about a man that knocked Lamas out, that knocked Michael Johnson out. And those two guys, by the way, were unconscious before they even hit the deck. We're talking about somebody that dropped Mirsad Bektic with a jab. We're talking about the fighter that dropped Jeremy Stephens, which is not an easy thing to do. Emmett hits really hard, and the one punch that Emmett hits extremely hard with is the right hand. The speed that he dips his shoulder and throws that right hand at is honestly unbelievable. And if Burgos comes into this boxing range and he's throwing these punches out, throwing his jab out, trying to hit a 1-2 on Emmett, and he's not got his hands up to his chin, Emmett will dip that shoulder and he'll land that nuke on Burgos. And I think if he lands that punch on Burgos, it's going to be the end of the night, or at least the start of the end of the night for Burgos. He's got to keep that defense sharp in this fight. In regards to volume, this is where I think Emmett lacks a little bit, because he's not a one bomb and bust guy. He will put combinations together. He will mix in low kicks as well. But there is times in the fight where he's maybe thinking a little bit too much, maybe trying to find that perfect combination. He just needs to be more active. But this is where the small cage comes into this, because I actually think this is going to make Josh Emmett work a little bit harder, which will actually benefit him, in my opinion. And the styles of both Burgos and Emmett as well, both like to pressure, both like to be the aggressor. Again, I think it's just going to cause more activity in the fight. And if Emmett does pick up that volume, then I think the fight is going to be close from a technical standpoint on the feet. I don't think Burgos is going to be able to run away with it in that scenario. But then you've got Emmett, who has the likelihood of knocking you out at any given moment inside the fight, even if it's the last second of the third round. So this is where I'm leaning Josh Emmett, because I think the fight could be close on the feet if he picks up his volume, which, like I said, the cage should do that. I think he's got a strong chance of knocking Shane Burgos out, and I think he could even wrestle if plan A isn't working out at all. Burgos, again, isn't easy to take down, but Emmett's a good wrestler, and if he does get on top, he can maintain position. So basically what I'm trying to say is, I think Emmett's got a plan A, a plan B. I think he can win a decision, but that will be close. But he's got that chance of knocking Burgos out at any point in the fight. Burgos can win as well. I'm not going to be shocked if he does win. I think Burgos is a great fighter, but he's got to respect the power of Emmett. And if he does, and he does hold his hands high, is he going to maintain that for the full 15 minutes? Is he going to remain disciplined? Is he going to look like the same fighter, changing traits and changing his defensive style? I think there's just a couple of questions there which can't really be answered, and I'm really intrigued to see how this fight plays out. If Burgos can get on the back foot and counter fight, he's the longer fighter, he's got the bigger reach, I think he could keep Emmett at the end of his jab. And by doing that, he will dictate the pace of the fight and ultimately give himself a good chance of winning. You know, like I say, it's not going to be a shock if Burgos wins. He's a favourite for a reason. He's a very, very talented fighter. I just think in this spot, style versus style, there's slightly more upside to Josh Emmett in this spot. So I'm going to pick Josh Emmett to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Raquel Pennington versus Marion Reneau. Raquel Pennington currently the -145 favourite. The comeback on Reneau at +125 as the underdog. In regards to where the value is at in this fight, I think there's minimal value on Pennington. I think Pennington is the rightful favourite. I do think the line could be a little bit closer though. So that's why I'm saying there's minimal value. I think she's playable at -145, but if you could get -130, -125, maybe even -120, I think that holds a lot more value than what the current line does. As for where the line moves, again, I think we're going to see some fluctuation because she was down at around -135. She's jumped back up to -150 in some places. So it is a little bit staggered, the line across the different books. But again, I just think it's going to fluctuate a little bit. I think we're going to see her come up a little bit, go back down. There's going to be money coming on her, money coming on Reneau, purely as underdog value. So yeah, minimal value on the favourite in Raquel Pennington at the moment. As for how this fight plays out though, I think Pennington's got more paths to victory here, and I think that's key, and I think that's probably why there's been more money coming back in on her over the last 24 to 48 hours. But the interesting thing about this fight is both ladies can do it all. So they're both good strikers. Pennington's more of a boxer, kickboxer style, whereas Reneau is more Muay Thai. On the ground, Pennington is more of a wrestler. Reneau is more of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, so that'll be sort of top versus bottom. They're both really, really well-rounded. Obviously, all fights start standing. I think on the feet, Pennington is going to be the better technical striker. I'm not sure she's going to have a speed advantage. I think the speed's going to be relatively close between the two women. But I do think that Pennington is slightly more aggressive. I think she'll be the one coming forward. I think she'll land more volume on Reneau. But Reneau, who actually turns 44 on the night, by the way, so huge respect to Marion Reneau for still fighting at 44 years old. You know, there's not many fighters in the world that can say that they're at that level, the highest level of the sport, still competing at that age. But as I was leading on to say, Marion Reneau is a good striker herself. Like I've said, Muay Thai, crisp Muay Thai, good kicks, good punches. She has that stalking style where she'll wait to fire hard counters. But ultimately, I think that's what's going to put her on the back foot. And if she starts getting beaten to the punch first by Pennington, which I think that she might do, then she will find herself falling short on the scorecards. Now, the other thing to touch upon as well is Marion Reneau's takedown defense is borderline non-existent, and this has been a huge problem for her in her UFC career. She gets taken down frequently, taken down by some fighters that you just wouldn't expect them to be looking for takedowns, and when she's on her back, she is what we call a guard player. So she will be happy on her back, happy to look for submissions, looking for sweeps, looking for reversals. But if she doesn't get it, again, she'll be falling short on the scorecards in the judges' eyes. And Pennington doesn't make many mistakes down on the mat. So if Pennington does start looking for takedowns, I think she can get Reneau down. I think she can stay safe out of the submission, out of the attempts of the reversals and the sweeps. This is what I meant at the start of this breakdown when I said there's more paths to victory for Pennington, because I think she beats her on the feet, and I think she could potentially be dominant on the mat in top position as well. I don't think we'll see many takedowns from Reneau, and if she does, I'm not convinced she'll be able to take Pennington down either. I really do think this is a fight for Raquel Pennington where she can really shine and look good in. So I'm going to take Pennington to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a really intriguing one with Lyman Good versus Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad currently the -145 favourite. The comeback on Lyman Good at +125 as the underdog. I actually think there's value on the underdog in this spot with Lyman Good. I think the lines could be closer. It wouldn't have shocked me if it was going to be a pick'em, so that's why I think that there is potential value on Good, because I do think ultimately it should be a pick'em. As for where the line goes, I'm actually not too sure with this one, because I would hazard a guess at more money coming in on Belal Muhammad, because he is a well-rounded fighter. People can trust him. He's a fighter with more UFC experience. People don't really seem to be too high on Lyman Good. So it wouldn't surprise me if money did keep coming in on Belal Muhammad, which would ultimately push Lyman Good as a wider underdog. But on the flip side, I wouldn't be shocked to see money coming in on Lyman Good either, because like I say, I do think the line should be a little bit closer. Other people might think that too. So yeah, really intriguing one here. As for the fight and how they match up, if this was a couple of years ago, I think every man and his dog would be all over Belal Muhammad. You know, Lyman Good had a history of being taken down easily, lying flat on his back, being able to be controlled whilst he's on his back, obviously with his opponent on top. And he was almost like a fish out of water down on the mat. But things have changed dramatically for Lyman Good over the last few years. He did take a competitive break for a while, but when he came back, his takedown defense looked absolutely fixed. Yes, he can still be taken down, so can most fighters, but it's much harder to get Lyman Good down nowadays. And when you do get him down, he will try and bounce straight back up instantly. And if he is taken down, he'll try and work his back to the cage to try and stand back up. He just doesn't look like that fighter that's taken down easily and then just controlled for the remainder of that round and potentially the remainder of the fight. Even when Demian Maia tried taking him down, the fight that Lyman Good put up with Demian Maia, he was relentless in that fight and adamant that he wasn't going to get taken down, to the point where Maia actually had to jump on his back in order to get the fight where Maia needed it to be. You know, Good looked decent then, and you could tell that that part of his game's improved. But he's predominantly a striker, and he needed to improve that part, because as a striker, he's dangerous, he's powerful, his kickboxing is crisp, it's sharp, he's got a nice jab. He's a very, very good fighter on the feet, and like I say, with those holes being patched in his defense, in the wrestling and the grappling, I do think that we are seeing developments from Lyman Good, and we could potentially see a better version inside the cage on Saturday night. The problem is, though, Belal Muhammad is so well-rounded. He can fight anywhere. He can wrestle, he can grapple, he can strike, he can fight at kicking range, he can fight in boxing range, he can pin you up to the cage, clinch you up, make it ugly, make it boring, make that clock just tick down. Whatever he needs to do to win a fight, Belal Muhammad can do it. And that's a big problem for Good in this fight, because he's got to find a way, he's got to have a game plan where he's not getting sucked into whatever game plan Belal's coming in with. I'd imagine Belal will come in with a wrestling game plan, try and take him down. But I do think that Belal's going to have trouble with that. If he does have trouble, then he can just, revert back to his striking, clinching, just wherever the fight is going to be winnable for him. So Lyman Good has got to be sharp. He's got to be active in every single area in this fight. He can't take a moment off. He can't switch off. He's got to be focused at all times, otherwise he will find himself losing this fight. But I just think that this fight could end up looking a lot like the Belal and the Jeff Neal fight, because I think that Lyman Good can stuff those takedowns that Jeff Neal stuffed. And although I don't think Lyman Good is as good as a striker as Jeff Neal, he is very similar in regards to pressing forward, fast hands, combinations. So I think ultimately, first and foremost, Good's got to stop the takedowns. If he does that, then he can start letting his hands go a little bit more inside the cage. He can start trying to crack Belal Muhammad with some hard shots. And I think once Belal feels the power of Good, then he might hesitate a little bit, take a second thought, step back, reevaluate what's going on inside the cage. And that's ultimately the same thing that happened with Jeff Neal. Once Neal cracked him a few times, Neal dropped him as well. Belal looked a little more static after those shots. I think the same thing could happen here. I do think it's a close fight, and I do think Good has to stop the takedowns. It's imperative. I think he does, though, and I think he gets the job done. So I'm going to pick Lyman Good to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a short notice fight and another quick turnaround as well. We've got Jim Miller versus Roosevelt Roberts. Roosevelt Roberts currently the -225 favourite. The comeback on Jim Miller at +185. I do think at these current lines, the value is on Jim Miller as the underdog. At +185, as good as Roberts is, as high on Roberts as I am, Jim Miller is a veteran, and it's these types of spots that we often see these prospects losing. I really don't think this line should be this wide, and because of that, I also think that the money is going to be coming on Jim Miller the closer we get to fight night on Saturday. I think once this line dips under -200, I think the money might stop coming in on Miller at that point, because I do think the line will start to be getting closer at that point to being where it should be at. So yeah, I think the money's going to come in on Jim Miller. I think he's the one that holds the value right now. As for where this fight goes, again, it's a very interesting one because Roberts is still relatively green in regards to UFC experience, and Jim Miller is absolutely a solid veteran with miles on the clock still. I think Miller's got to get this fight to the mat though. He's got to try and take Roberts down. I think if it stays on the feet and Miller's not shooting takedowns, Miller does stand that chance of landing something hard, but I don't think that outcome is very likely. And I think if the fight plays out on the feet, I think Roberts will find his space, he'll find his distance, he'll be able to pepper away at Miller, he'll be able to throw the jab out there, combinations, and I just think he'll rack up a ton of volume on Jim Miller, and if he doesn't finish him with the accumulation of volume, he'll easily win a decision in that spot. But if Jim Miller shoots, if he can take him down, if he can get on top of Roberts, it might be a different fight. Roberts might not be able to get back up with Jim Miller on top of him. Miller is a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I think he would have his way with Roberts if he was on top. Obviously, Miller would have to be careful of that choke on the way down, but again, I don't think it's something Miller's going to get caught in. Roberts has got to have this takedown defense on point, because if Miller does decide to be adamant that he wants to fight on the mat and he gets to fight down there, then Roberts could find himself in some bad spots. He could end up being potentially grinded out for the rest of that round. He could potentially be submitted too. So Roberts has got to be careful, but I think the athleticism, I think the speed, I think the footwork, the movement, and the fact that Roberts is the younger, fresher fighter in there, I do think those points on the checklist are checked off by Roberts. So although, as I said, I think the value is on Jim Miller in this fight right now, I am picking Roosevelt Roberts to win the fight. And in the next fight, another short notice fight, we've got Clay Guida versus Bobby Green. We've got Bobby Green, the current -235 favourite. The comeback on Clay Guida is +195. I think this betting line is absolutely insane. And it's funny because I actually taped this fight before the lines came out, and I was expecting to pick him. And I was actually thinking, would Bobby Green be a plus money underdog to Clay Guida? And then he opens up at -225, and then more money comes in on Bobby Green. I can't believe the line's this wide. I definitely think there's value on Clay Guida. I don't think there's any value on Bobby Green at -235, which, for reasons I'll explain very shortly. As for where the line goes, I'm just very confused right now, because at -225 where Bobby Green opened, I thought Guida would get absolutely steamed at that line. I thought Bobby Green would come way under -200, maybe sit at around -150, but Actually, it's gone up by a few cents. So very, very confused right now in regards to where the line's going to go. I would assume it comes back in on Clay Guida, but who knows. As for where they match up and why I think the line's crazy is because stylistically they both match up very, very well. They're both all-round fighters. They can both strike, they can both wrestle, they can both grapple. How they both go about that, though, is a little bit different. Guida likes the crazy movement, doesn't stop moving, constantly likes to be active. Even if he's not engaging or doing anything, he'll be bouncing around. Bobby Green, a little more reserved, likes to watch the strikes come in, likes to be reactive opposed to proactive, and look to counter the shots coming in, which is actually going to make for a pretty good fight, in my opinion. Now, why I think the line's insane is because although Guida didn't look great against BJ Penn, a guy who is losing bar fights right now, obviously people are seeing that as a huge negative on Guida's side, but Bobby Green fights so close every single fight. I can't remember the last fight of Bobby Green's that I watched where he dominated, where he got to a decision and there was just no doubt in your mind that he'd won at least 2 rounds on the scorecards. Every single fight that he has is just extremely close, win, lose or draw. And with the style that Guida has, with how he fights, this is going to be another one of those razor close fights where at the end of the fight we're likely going to be wondering who's actually won the fight on the judges' scorecards. So with these thoughts in my mind, I am very interested to see if I'm right and how that fight plays out, because I do think it's very close. With all that said, with the crazy lines, with the value definitely on Clay Guida, I am going to be picking Bobby Green to win this fight. I do think Green's got more in the tank at this point. I do think that although he's going to have to weather a little bit of a crazy storm at the start with Guida's movement, as the longer the fight goes on, the more he'll get into the fight, the more he'll land on Guida. And also he's got that plan B of wrestling as well. If he wants to take Guida down, I think he could get him down. And Guida's grappling defense isn't too great either, so Green could have success there. I am leaning towards Green. I do think that he's the more likely fighter to win here, but it's close and there's no value on his current line in my opinion. And in the next fight, we've got Tecia Torres versus Brianna Van Buren. Van Buren currently the -200 favourite. The comeback on Torres at +170. I don't see any value in this fight at all at the minute. And I think the reason behind this is because it's one of those types of fights where the favourite is probably going to win the fight, but the line is just a little bit too high. I said the same thing about Andre Fili and Charles Jourdain last week, and that fight played out relatively close. Shouldn't have been a split decision, but we digress. And back to this fight in question. I think that if the line comes in a little bit on Van Buren, if we see her coming back to the -175 range, that'll be value on the favourite at that point. And I do think there's a chance that that happens as well, because Torres has got name value. And although she's declining, she's definitely not washed. She's definitely going to be competitive in this fight and other fights moving forward in the near future as well. So I do see that line coming a little bit shorter with the money coming in on Tecia Torres. Now, for how these two match up, it's prospect versus vet again. It's a big test for Brianna and it's a big step up as well. I cash Brianna as a plus money underdog against Livia Renato Souza in a UFC debut. She looked amazing in that fight. The one thing we saw was a development with her striking. When I watched tape on her before that Souza fight, her wrestling looked good, her grappling looked good. But ultimately, it was the hands that got her the win in a UFC debut. So this shows me that she's very well-rounded and she's going to have a lot of success in this fight and in fights in the UFC in general. Now, the thing about Tecia Torres is, for pretty much her entire career, she's relied on very quick speed and movement in and out the pocket, just being very hard to hit, hard to look good against. But like I say, as she's declining a little bit, because she is, it's not a secret, she's not as good as what she once was, and she's closer to the end of her career than she is the beginning of it. So that speed is starting to slow down. And with that being one of her better attributes over the years, I do think that this is a big problem for her now. She's starting to slow down because she can't rely on that speed. And she's not bad technically as a striker, and she's got decent wrestling. She's really well-rounded, but she relied so heavily on that speed that I do think we're seeing that decline a little bit more in these moments. And I just think that it's a good spot for Brianna Van Buren to come in here, perform well, get a name on her record, put herself on the map, and ultimately start working towards those top rankings for sure. I do think that Torres is going to have her moments in this fight. I do think Torres might win a round, but I think over the 3 rounds, Van Buren's going to put up the more volume. I think she's going to fight at a faster pace. I think she's going to be the more aggressive fighter. I think she's going to be able to use her wrestling. I think she's going to get in on some takedowns. She might not be successful straight away, but she will be persistent, and they will come eventually if she has that mindset and starts chain wrestling as well. I just think that Van Buren's going to win 2 out of these 3 rounds at least against Tecia Torres, so I'm going to pick her to win the fight. And next up, we've got Marc-Andre Barriault versus Oskar Piechota. Oskar Piechota currently the -135 favourite. The comeback on Barriault at +115 as the underdog. I do think there's minimal value in this fight on the favourite. I think that the betting line is very close to being absolutely accurate at this point. But if you like Oskar Piechota, I do think that he is bettable at this moment, at this betting line. As for where the line moves, I do think that it's going to roughly stay around where it is now, because I think it's very close to being bang on the money. So maybe a little fluctuation either side, but I think the line is going to close around where it is right now. As for how this fight plays out, I hate to talk about this, I hate to mention it, but I do think that the loser of this fight has a very good chance of getting cut from the UFC. Both fighters are on 3-fight losing streaks. Oskar Piechota losing to Gerald Meerschaert, Rodolfo Vieira and Punahele Soriano. Then on the other side, we've got Marc-Andre Barriault, who's lost to Andrew Sanchez, Krzysztof Jotko and Jun-Yong Park. Now, actually looking at those, I don't think that Piechota's losses are actually that bad. You know, losing to Gerald Meerschaert, Rodolfo Vieira and Punahele Soriano, all of those 3 fighters are decent fighters. It's Barriault that worries me, because I think that Andrew Sanchez, Krzysztof Jotko in particular, although they've got name value, I do think they're fighters that are beatable at this level. And I think as for Jun-Yong Park, I think that fight was potentially given to him to get back in the win column and he didn't do it. So really interesting fight. I think there's going to be a cagey start. I think both fighters are going to be very aware of what a loss could do to them with their UFC career. But I do favour Oskar Piechota in this fight. I think he's fought the better level competition. I think he's the better technical striker. I think he's more aggressive. I think he's going to be the one moving forward. Got to be careful of that power coming from Barriault, though. Barriault does hit hard. He has power in his hands. He does have wrestling as well, but Piechota's a very good grappler. So if Barriault does take him down, then he's got to mind his P's and Q's down there with Piechota, because Piechota could make him pay for a mistake. In regards to cardio, they both slow down, so it's going to be really interesting with this small cage and how much action we actually get out of these guys, because if it's action-packed from the start of the fight, then we could see both guys slowing down and one might make that mistake that ultimately costs them the fight. It's a really interesting one. I think Piechota, though, what I'm trying to say is just a little bit better in every area than Barriault. As long as he avoids that big shot and doesn't get knocked out, which, by the way, is possible. Like I've said, Barriault hits hard. But if Piechota avoids those shots, those heavy shots, I think he's going to win this fight. So I'm going to pick Oskar Piechota to win. And in the next fight, the trending theme continues. We've got another quick turnaround. We've got Courtney Casey versus Julian Robertson. Julian Robertson currently the -120 favourite. The comeback on Courtney Casey is +100. In regards to where the value is with this fight, I actually think the value is on Courtney Casey. You know, she was in there a couple of weeks ago. She's going to be ready to go again. She didn't take any damage. And I think she's going to cause Julian Robertson some problems inside the cage, especially with Robertson's style. Again, I'll talk about that very shortly. However, where the line moves, I do see this coming in as a pick'em as we get closer to the fight on Saturday. I just think a pick'em is where it's at, and I don't think either of these women should be favoured over the other. I think they're both very, very well matched. As for the fight itself, we all know what Julian Robertson's about. She's a fighter that tries to look for takedowns. She's got good grappling, she's got a good submission game. She'll try and get her opponents to the mat and get them out of there, you know. She'll strike for a little bit while she's looking for her entries, but her striking isn't really a bread and butter. It's down on the mat. Courtney Casey, on the other hand, is a well-rounded fighter. She can fight everywhere. She's good on the feet. As I've mentioned, she's tall, she's rangy. She's got nice fundamentals on the feet to keep her safe, to keep that distance and that range. She'll kick to the legs, she'll kick to the body, she'll jab, and she'll evade. And like I say, fight on the back foot, be defensive, and do well keeping on the outside. But she's also got good jiu-jitsu as well, as we saw in her last fight against Barriault. You know, Barriault took her down, and Casey ended up submitting her off her back. So she's no slouch down there. She's got good jiu-jitsu herself. And I think that length and range is going to cause Robertson problems. I think that Robertson's going to have a tough time trying to get inside, trying to shoot those takedowns. I think Casey's going to do well at maintaining that range, that distance, and hitting Robertson from the outside. And if Julian Robertson does get on the inside and does manage to take her down, I don't think she can roll on her like she has done some of her previous opponents. I don't think Courtney Casey is going to give up too many positions that easily. I think she'll be competitive on the mat. Now, where Courtney Casey is going to lose this fight is if Robertson can get her down, keep her down, and spend time on top. I think Casey's got to prioritise getting back up to her feet opposed to playing on the bottom, because Julian Robertson is good on top. And if she can keep her there, then Courtney Casey might find herself getting behind on the scorecards as that clock ticks by. But like I say, I think that Courtney Casey's going to have a lot of advantages in this fight. I think she's got a striking advantage, and I don't think her grappling's bad on the mat either. So I'm going to pick Courtney Casey to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Matt Frevola versus Frank Camacho. A really fun fight here. Matt Frevola currently the -115 favourite. The comeback on Camacho at -105, a slight underdog. I do think the value's on the favourite here with Matt Frevola. I do think the line should be a little bit wider. In regards to where the line goes, I think you could make a legit argument for betting either side here, and I think that's going to reflect in the betting line as well. I could see Frevola going up to -120, -125, and then money on Camacho coming in, knocking that all the way back down. So I do think it's going to fluctuate. I think the line is going to stay roughly where it is right now. As for how these match up, we all know what Frank Camacho's about at this point. He will throw in sporadic takedowns into his game, but he is predominantly a striker. He's got power in his hands. He's durable. He can take a shot. He'll come forward. He looks to have fun in there. He's recently started mixing his punches down to the body as well as the head, which served him well in the Nick Hine fight. Matt Frevola, on the other hand, the steamroller Frevola, is a ball of energy in there. He's got a good kickboxing game, good punches, good kicks. Again, will mix it up to the body and head. He will always look to move forwards. He's got good pressure, good aggression. But his plan B in his back pocket is his wrestling. You know, he's got good takedowns, he's got good top control. And his entries into the double legs and the chain wrestling as well, he's just really, really good. And I actually think it's a really underrated part of his game, you know, watching tape back on him. The steamroller Frevola is a good wrestler. And ultimately, that's why I'm going to be picking him to win here, because I think he's got more paths to victory. He's got to be careful on the feet, and he's got to make sure he doesn't get knocked out by Camacho. But if Camacho doesn't knock him out, I think Frevola's got the tools to win this fight, because, like I say, he's a good striker himself. He can wrestle. And ultimately, if things aren't going his way on the feet, if Camacho is being very aggressive and starts to land some hard shots, he can level change and take that break that he needs to reset, also whilst winning points on the judges' scorecard. So I think a style versus style here. As long as Frevola doesn't get knocked out by Camacho, he should win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Roxanne Modafferi versus Lauren Murphy. Modafferi currently the -120 favourite. The comeback on Lauren Murphy at +100 as the slight underdog. I do think that there's value on the underdog in this fight in Lauren Murphy, but at the same time, I don't think the lines are too far off from being accurate either. As for where the lines go, again, it might fluctuate by a couple of cents, but I do think that the line isn't far off from where it'll close on Saturday night. And on to how this fight plays out, I think it's going to play out pretty close as well. I think Lauren Murphy's got the advantage on the feet. I think Modafferi's going to have the advantage in the wrestling. But Lauren Murphy's not that easy to take down. She can get back up. We saw that in the Andrea Lee fight in her last fight in the UFC, which I think was a robbery, by the way. I can't believe that Murphy won that fight. But hey, that's what you get with the Texas Commission. But moving back to this fight, ultimately, again, I think Lauren Murphy has just got more tools to win this fight. I think she's the better striker. And as long as she doesn't get taken down too often and controlled on the mat for long periods, she should beat Roxanne Modafferi. Wouldn't be shocked if Modafferi won the fight by the methods that I've just spoken about. But I am going to be picking Lauren Murphy to win this fight. Now, in the next fight, we should have had Austin Hubbard versus Joe Selecki. I did bet Joe Selecki in a parlay against Austin Hubbard. Joe Selecki unfortunately had to pull out. He stated that it was reasons beyond his control, so I hope all is well with Selecki and we see him back soon. However, Austin Hubbard has a replacement opponent. We've got Austin Hubbard versus Max Ruskov. Ruskov making his UFC debut. And it's actually Max Ruskov who is the -135 favourite with the comeback on Austin Hubbard as the +105 underdog. Now, some people are going to be surprised that the short notice UFC debutant is currently sitting as a favourite against Austin Hubbard, who's had a few fights in the UFC right now. But actually, when you watch the tape on Max Ruskov, you can see why he is favoured in this matchup. He looks exciting, and even though he is still green, a 5-0 professional record, he honestly looks like he's got a lot of potential to do good things in mixed martial arts. And I think that there's value on the favourite for that reason. It is marginal value. I don't think there's any huge value. I don't think he should be minus 200 in this spot. Like I say, it's short notice. It's his UFC debut. So I definitely don't think he should be up at that high of a line. But I do think that there's value on him at the current line against Austin Hubbard. Where the line goes, I'm a little bit unsure. Again, it's what people see. Do people look at the skills of this guy? Do people look at the potential, the ceiling? Or are people going to be looking at, it's a short notice fight, it's a UFC debut, he's 5-0, he's going to be green. How many fighters have we seen that have got this good potential lose in the UFC debut just because they're facing that greater level of competition? So I do think it's going to fluctuate for that reason. I could see it maybe going up to minus 150, minus 160, and then at that point people putting money on Hubbard and it bringing back down to the minus 130, minus 135 line, roughly where it is about now. So I do think the line is going to fluctuate for sure, but I do also think it'll close similar to where it is right now. Now, as for how these two match up, Austin Hubbard is not going to be an easy fight for Max Ruskov coming in on his UFC debut. Hubbard's good everywhere. He's a tough, gritty fighter, good cardio, happy to weather a storm, happy to go wherever the fight takes him. Like I say, he's not an easy fight for anybody, but Max Ruskov, I think, has got a lot of really good skills from what I've seen. I've seen him drop fighters with his hands, so he's got power in the hands. He has a solid wrestling background, so you can imagine his wrestling's good, his takedowns are good. In one of his previous fights, his opponent was on top. He managed to stand back up with a whizzer, transition straight into the single leg and get back on top instantly. His jiu-jitsu is also very solid. All his 5 wins are by chokes. Honestly, this kid just looks to be solid in every aspect of MMA. He just needs that experience under his belt, because at 5-0 it does raise some questions of what is he going to be like in the UFC on his debut, fighting much tougher competition than he's ever fought before. But man, once he's got that experience under his belt, he might take 1 or 2 L's along the way. This is going to be a very, very exciting prospect for the future. And although earlier I said Austin Hubbard is good everywhere, which is true, I also think Max Ruskov is good everywhere, solid everywhere, and potentially a little bit better everywhere than Austin Hubbard. So I am going to pick Max Ruskov to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it again. And once again, guys, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to the channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on. And as a long-term winning gambler over the last 3.5 years, that'll come good for you. And we also cater for you fun gamblers as well. So you guys that like the fun shot parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK, we have plenty of different packages for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices as well. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.